Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition, episode 120. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arta Cards. And today's quote, "The Toyota production system can be realized only when all of the workers can become tortoises," from Taiichi Ohno. This felt for years like a quote, like a concept that was sort of like theoretically true, but not really true. And for some reason over the last like week or so, it's become clear to me. Oh, I know the reason. The reason is I'm rereading the Toyota Way. And chapter 4 or principle 4 or whatever in the book is leveling production.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it on the airplane on like a red eye, and I was like so amped up because like one of the lines in there is basically
like you do
Toyota. So a lot of companies, when they hear about lean, the first thing they do, which is exactly what we did, is try to eliminate waste, the 7 wastes,
sure,
or 8 or 9, depending how you count, because they're the easiest to see. And in the book, they say that the maybe the most counterintuitive one is actually reducing fluctuation or leveling production.
Yeah.
And I think actually over the years, we've sort of cited some of the counter examples, and a lot of the counter examples to sort of what's thought of as like the normal just-in-time Toyota production system ideas of like, make things just in time. A lot of the things that make you sort of scratch your head, I think, relate to this, like the gutter company we've talked about a few times. So I was sort of thinking, one of the big things that was an eye-opener was they said, like, if you manufacture to order, a lot of companies, when they decide to manufacture to order, end up paradoxically only working on orders today, like that they have today, but are asking their customers to wait weeks, right? Because it's like, okay. Yeah. And that really hit home for me because we do all of our assembly, quote unquote, just in time, like responding to real orders.
Yeah.
And sometimes because of the fluctuations in sales, we get behind. And by sometimes, I mean every Monday, there's a pile from stuff over the weekend because it turns out a lot of people order stuff over the weekend.
Yeah.
And then there's 2 or 3 days of it accumulating, right? All of Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday. And so we end up with a big pile. And so there's a big push at the beginning of the week to sort of get stuff out for customers because there's an expectation that it ships quickly.
Sure.
And then if we get over our heads, like lately we've had wait times of 5, 6, 7 days, business days.
Yeah.
People get unhappy.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'm realizing, and then internally it causes a lot of problems because suddenly we start working on big orders and then suddenly we're out of pins and then we're using pins a lot. And so then it's like, oh, wow, we really have to order pin stock today.
Yeah.
Or we rip through a ton of stuff like aluminum blocks. And then I'm calling you like, hey, any chance, whatever.
Yeah.
And so, and then lastly, toward the end of the week, we're sort of slow on production. And so then we're like looking for stuff to do around the shop, and there's always stuff to do. So it's not a huge problem, but like all in all, it's just not good. And so I will, this is, I don't know, based on my previous understanding. I mean, it's so cool that you can spend years on this and I have continuous revelations, but
I was talking to a friend someone I just met and talking about my business. And I was mentioning like, I don't really like get into the machining as much these days. It's more about the puzzle of running a business and all of that. And they're like, wow, that's wild and like hard to imagine. I'm like, well, I mean, if you're the kind of person who likes an unsolvable puzzle, like it's the thing for you.
Yeah, I guess that's it. So we're going to start producing finished goods.
Yeah.
As a trial.
Stocking finished
goods, which I don't think is necessarily... Yeah, I think it's the only way I can think of currently. Like you said just before the podcast, like unless we can produce instantly, then we're going to have lead time associated with not having finished goods.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to stock standard finished goods and build in Kanban significant Kanban loops
for
finished goods that are subservient to real orders, so that they can fill in valleys and then in production. And then the other part of the idea would be to make sure that we're working to a systematic mix of those finished goods to level demand of upstream processes. So if we say we're always going to produce one Kanban of 3/4 cams, one Kanban of 1-inch cams, and one Kanban of belts, if those Kanbans are triggered, suddenly all the demand on our stock will be leveled.
Yeah.
So just like a lot of upstream processes will be leveled. So that's my current thinking.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a note in here, independent of what we were talking about, but just that the beauty of Kanban is that if it's sized properly and it's actually reflective of your whole process and actually reflective of your ongoing demand, it removes urgency from the whole equation.
Yeah. So,
which is, I was thinking about it in regards to our job management, where we are often trying to surface several types of information in one location. Going back to my job board, like we're trying to surface state, like, what are we trying to surface? State, like what it is, what the level of urgency is. I guess those are the three things that are coming immediately to mind. And then like these extra layers, whereas like if Kanban is truly functioning, you can just like delete the urgency.
Right.
More or less, except in maybe some cataclysmic sort of scenario. But more or less, you can delete the urgency out of that whole thing, and things can just be leveled and march through their process as necessary.
Totally. And it's almost inherent in designing that Kanban system to level urgency across your loops.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you have a high demand item, it should have probably more Kanban, et cetera, which we haven't done successfully yet. It's really hard. But yeah, that's cool. We're writing a bit of a white paper with our technical advisor, Miguel Pinilla. And he, very interesting the way he writes about these things. And basically like command and control style, sort of ERP or MRP style management has no feedback loop. And so you're basically sending out commands, right? Yeah. And then the true state of the shop floor is sort of a variable. And if you're trying to highly optimize how your system is going to work, then any wrench in the works is going to cause, we talked about this last time with like the Jenga analogy, which is a great analogy.
I don't know if we use the Jenga analogy. What's that?
Oh, I thought you said like playing Jenga, you have more tiles. The more tiles you have, the more densely you can pack everything.
Oh, Tetris.
Oh, sorry. Tetris. Jenga. Yeah. Tetris.
I'm sure there isn't a Jenga analogy, but I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah. And so, well, I guess the whole thing crashing down when you tried to stick an extra block in there or something.
Or you removed all of them from the right side because stock wasn't here.
Right. Anyway, I wanted to read through some of the results from the gutter company because they're pretty striking.
Well, wait, what was the rest of the white paper? Or was that it, basically? That was the thesis.
Good point. So a lot of those systems, command and control, they have a hyperbolic response to variability.
Yeah.
So your cycle time massively increases. You promise around your 65th percentile so that you're basically inherently planning around bad optimization so that you can have variability without it blowing up your whole plan. Tends to be how things settle out.
Yeah.
And so with a pull system, with Kanban, you end up with a very controllable system such that if there is variability, which we know there always is, it stays linear. And so it just sort of works itself out because everything's communicating to everything else. And if you think about it, Kanban is basically all bottom up feedback. Like it's all sort of saying, is the next process ready for more of this?
Yeah.
Rather than sort of, push versus pull. That's sort of the premise. But Yeah, so a lot of those systems are fundamentally based on push, command and control. And anyway, it's just interesting that there's like a paradoxical issue with that system of like on one hand seeking optimization, hence the planning. On the second, if you optimize around a really high utilization, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like I was sort of thinking about how you apply that to job shop, but you probably have a better idea, because the problem with job shopping, it seems like in terms of production leveling, and I'm sure I'm just not thinking about this creatively enough, is that you can't start programming someone's work before they're like, hey, can you make this for me?
Yeah.
You can work on your templates and speeding up the programming process.
Right. Yeah.
But,
no, I mean, you can't, you can work on you can work to make your systems as sort of like as fast as possible. So you can shorten the like loop from when you receive an order to when you ship an order.
Yeah.
And there's some games you can play, right, where you can like choose to stock standard material on stuff that you know you use often. But yeah, fundamentally you cannot be producing work that has not been ordered, which is what you were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
So I think you have to start thinking about, diminishing that lead time as much as possible. A lot of the leveling in job shop work, I think, happens with like non-value add activities or like auxiliary activities.
Yeah.
And
so actually, now that you say that, there's like very, sorry.
I was just trying to think. I felt like there was something in the back of my head that was another
lever to pull,
but it's escaped me. So,
another example in this section of the Toyota Way was a call center, and they did exactly what you're talking about, which is you can't.
Oh, I do remember.
Yeah.
The main lever I think you have to pull is saying no to work.
That's a bummer.
It is, yeah, but also not necessarily, right? Like if you sort of accept the fact that you have a finite capacity and you can size your load to your capacity by saying no, it actually is a very strong lever to pull because it gives you the power to choose the most profitable work, hopefully.
Right. That makes sense. So the call center, they have people on who are going to respond to calls.
Yeah.
You need them to be available when someone calls for a good experience.
Sure.
And so they put the call computers in production cells. So people can take the calls, and there's people in the hot seat, they call it.
Yeah.
And around the holidays, they have people who are dedicated because the volume is high enough to ensure some people are busy.
This was with the fulfillment company?
This was with a food company. Yeah.
Like they ship. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and a lot of, they level the demand on the people by adding in those auxiliary tasks, like you're talking about in on a board. So like processing credit cards, processing gift cards, like all these other things that need to happen, including like packing and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I guess it's kind of weird. Like it's weird to imagine hiring a programmer and paying them programmer rates and then having them like sweep the floor.
Yeah.
Right? But there's huge power in that.
The other thing I was going to say, it's not leveling in the classic sort of sense. But the more redundancy you have in skill sets, the more you can sort of like level the workload across workers with a variable load of work. Basically the same as what you're talking about, but you can do that on value add. So it's like if you had a bunch of people who are capable of programming in a CNC shop, for example, programming, setting up, and running machines, if you get a glut of work that all needs to be programmed, you can spread that across multiple people, and then they can transition, which is, I've been thinking about the tortoise and the hare thing a little in different context recently, but how critical it is when you have a flow type system to not get ahead, because then the people downstream of you just get starved for work, and it ends up interrupting the system pretty significantly.
for people downstream to not get ahead because then they're pulling too much from upstream, or then they're idle? Or what do you mean? Where's the importance of not getting ahead?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good example.
I mean, also that's very much in line with everything Toyota writes about. So
yeah,
I think you're right.
Well, I guess so here's, maybe I didn't say this quite correctly. The example we had right on this last week was, we programmed a bunch of work, we proofed it, and then we ran it and we shipped it. Mm-hmm. And on the surface, that's like, this was on a Friday. On the surface, that's great. Like, we got all this stuff out the door, it got to the customers, fantastic. Come Monday, there's no work to be done on the machines, and if assuming nobody had done setup or prep jobs or do the programming,
right?
So now there's 3 people standing idle. While in this instance, because we don't have redundancy across skill sets, one person's frantically programming parts in order to feed everybody else their work.
Yeah.
So it can often be very counterintuitive, but just to be like, well, wait, don't actually finish those parts today, even though that seems crazy.
Yeah. Another very strong example I've been seeing is in our paint department. I often have parts ready to paint sitting in front of me, and if I paint them, we reduce throughput in the paint department.
Yeah.
Because our oven is too small. So yes, we could get a bigger oven and we might do that, but it's an interesting example because if we load the oven all at once, now we have to wait for 2 hours to put in another batch. That's the cycle time. If instead we put one shelf in, wait an hour to put the next shelf in, wait an hour to put the next shelf in, we can actually flow continuously through that department.
Yeah.
And so instead of me getting ahead on paint, it always is important to go make sure that enough parts are being prepped, right? That the CNC is running, so we have parts. The sandblaster is running so that we can feed the gas out oven. The gas out oven is running, and it's so easy to look at the pile of parts in the paint department, go like, well, the point of paint is to paint parts. Let's go. Like, let's paint all these parts, and that just reduces the overall throughput throughout the day.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the classic gutter company in terms of production leveling.
I want to find out what company this was that I should
ship them a medal.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Here's your challenge coin. Congratulations.
So one very interesting thing to me is that the lean consultant recommended they hold four types of inventory and actually separate where those are stored so that it is clear what is being drawn down. And so this gutter company had a huge issue. I think we've talked about it before, but just a quick recap. Very seasonal demand. They had to produce a ton over 3 months of the year, and then their other months were pretty idle.
Well, they had to sell a bunch over 3 months of the year.
Yes, right. Most of their demand came in 3 months, and the way they were treating it is, well, if we don't have demand, let's just idle the company. And so they had high turnover because they'd hire people seasonally and then fire them. They had 12 shipping loading docks that were active to deal with receiving and shipping all their stuff.
Yeah.
And so the 4 types of inventory that the consultant recommended, one was seasonal inventory. So they basically made a calendar of the year and put markers of how much inventory should be on hand at the end of, every single month. So at a glance, you could look and see okay, it's halfway through September and our inventory is filling up half of the September slot.
And that is the slot that is slated for the high demand part of the year to be produced in September, right? That's what it was?
Yeah. So all that stuff will be drawn down in the busy 3 months. Yeah. But that is how much should be produced
in September
buffer. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So they have a seasonal buffer. Then they also had a separate lane, which was build to order. And so that was to make getting it on the trucks and everything very fast. Mm-hmm. Anything that was built to order was this separate line. Yeah. I didn't quite understand exactly how that was dealt with in terms of prioritization. I would imagine it was sort of
on the actual production side.
Yeah. How it was mixed in and stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't really dive into detail there. Then they had inventory for spikes in demand separate from their seasonal demand. So just
not predictive, but
yeah, some customer calls up and says hey, can I have a bunch of this weird tan color? Yeah. And they're So some for that. And then lastly, buffer for plant caused variability. So like downtime on their machines.
Sure.
So they also had buffers for that. What's interesting is that they separated it into 4 because it starts to clarify all the ways you can sort of think about maintaining, like it shows you how critical it is that you level production across every eventuality. And also I would imagine it would really help you identify what you're struggling with in the company. If someone called with a big order and you went to the big order buffer and you're like, oh, this isn't enough to cover variability, right? Yeah. Like that that would be much more informative than just having this broad pool. And anytime you run out, you go like, well, I guess we should make more. It's like, well, why should we make more? Is that because of seasonal demand? Is that because of downtime in the plant? Like what's happening? So that was interesting. The results of this. Oh, and then they control all of those through Kanban, and all of those Kanban cards are put into, I'm going to forget the term. It's not a Kamishibai board. It's a Heijunka board, I want to say. Yeah. Which was scheduled down to 2-hour slots, or maybe hourly slots in that company. Wow. So they'd load in the production for the day, and it was balanced. So like it was that mix of all the different product types and more. It was balanced across what needed to be produced in aggregate in the correct mix. Spread out throughout the day, which is really fascinating.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think we can get there. I'm not there yet. They were able to go down to 2 loading docks from 12. They reduced lead times by 40%. They reduced changeover times by 70%. They reduced WIP of painted products by 40%. They reduced inventory obsolescence down by 60%. On-time delivery was at nearly 100%. Wow. They had much better retention of people because they could keep high-skilled people throughout the year instead of just firing everyone when their season was over. And so he sort of sums it up by like, paradoxically, you should holding another paradox of lean manufacturing is by holding more of the right inventory. It says hold more of the right inventory to have less overall inventory. Right. Which is, it's like, wait, hold more. But this is why. It's like in the right places for the right reasons fixes a lot of other problems. Yeah. Anyway.
Totally. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about starting to consider stocking material. Just because it has become...
Right, that would shave like a week off of your lead times, right?
Often, yeah, shave a week off. Assuming we could figure out how to make it work. Mm-hmm. And it's probably not as expensive as I think it is. And so there's the lead time is huge. The other is like, there's been quite a few times recently where I've been in the shop and like 2 of us are working on value add. Okay. And there's 2 people like fully occupied with logistics and administrative stuff that's all pretty much concerned with the comings and goings of stuff from our shop and to our shop.
Interesting.
And just looking at that and just being like, that is a crazy amount of energy to be putting towards it. And it's very easy to write it off and say like, well, we're working on like high value parts right now. Like we can afford to be putting this extra time in. And then simultaneously, I'm like, it's still crazy. Yeah. Right. Like if we could not do this, it would be better.
It's crazy. And it's a repeated part of your business. Yeah. Which is like all the shipping and receiving. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we could make that a standard, it would just be easy. The procurement would be so simple. Like we could just Kanban it and we could start to track some of that inventory. I think probably our stock waste would go down overall.
That kind of makes sense because you don't have like offcuts if it's a standard size.
Yeah. And these days, I mean, we're doing I haven't really dove in and like done any sort of like real analysis to see what would be involved in making this work. But we're buying a lot of like kind of, bigger-ish stuff. Mm-hmm. And we might get an order for one part. we order enough for 3 in case 2 of them are wrong.
Right.
Sometimes we need those. Often we get it on the first one, and now there's 2 blocks that we spent, I don't know, anywhere from, $200 to $1,000 on just sitting there.
Right.
And
wouldn't it also help in programming, or is that a very small part of the programming challenge? Because not just programming, also like setups, I guess, like work holding stuff. Or pretty minor.
My knee jerk is to say it wouldn't, but I think the reality is that yes, I'm sure it would. We'd start to have it. Yeah, there's been no place so far where we have standardized something and it didn't have like really good sort of knock-on effects that we didn't anticipate.
So in this chapter, he also said like the pushback from shops is typically like, you want us to hold more in, like, we don't know what's going to sell basically, which is kind of the issue with stock. And the recommendation is to find like 1 or 2 examples of something. Like, I wonder if you just start by ordering 1 or 2 stock sizes.
Yeah.
And just seeing.
Right. We do that for one customer who, like, their parts are sized that we can pretty much all get them out of one size material. And that's fantastic. So, like, I know it works in that instance.
Interesting.
And is great. And we just sort of like, we haven't Kanban'd it. We purchase it to order. But maybe we should. And I think we would have to we'd have to develop a process where maybe we buy quite oversized material and we develop a process to saw it down to things that are workable for our general kind of workflow and size of parts.
You also need like a ripping station, which sounds insane, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
you can either rough it with like a saw or you can rough it with $100,000 mill.
Sure. Yeah.
Which maybe you just mill it. I don't know.
Yeah. And maybe we just don't concern ourselves with waste if we're working on these kinds of parts with material waste.
Yeah.
And we just say the waste that we would have had in labor and offcuts sitting on a shelf of random sizes is far less than the waste of making a 3-inch block out of a 6-inch block.
I bet that's right. The other thing you could do is, even with lower value parts, you could sort of say like, here's the quantity that you'll need to order, like that the customer will need to order, where getting into specific sizes makes sense, right? Like where the waste of material starts to exceed the other wastes of procurement and inventorying and I don't know, the rest of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I bet it would be huge to standardize to some degree.
Yeah. I think in the past it's been challenging just because of the money tied up in that seemed large. And these days it's seeming smaller relative.
Well, that's a win right there.
To the other wastes involved.
Interesting.
We have a note here about a question from Kevin Blodgett. I never actually read the question. Do you have it accessible?
I probably do. Let's see.
Kamishibai board email reminders.
Yeah. So if it takes me a second, we'll do that. Otherwise, I can summarize.
I have just a side note here. Yep. So we bought a machine. We sold a machine. That machine that we sold was that was the first new machine we bought. So it had been in the shop a long time. We had built a lot around its capabilities, processes. The differences between it and the other machines are subtle, but not insignificant. And it's been a real challenge getting things switched over to other machines on top of our normal workload. And it just kind of reminded me why shops tend to not just shops, I think businesses in general tend to take a don't fix it if it ain't broke sort of approach. And I don't like to fall back on that, but having this reminder has been very illuminating as to how much that disruption and change really costs.
And hearing you say that, I wonder if the sweet spot there, like a unifying concept, would be like that is a value add process. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like focus on all the non-value add processes that are not broke, but only because there's no system at all, right?
Yeah.
Like that might just let you continue to pursue improvements, and actually like typically those improvements are much more impactful per dollar anyway. And so maybe that's just like a win-win. It's like, don't touch the code, don't touch production stuff. That is value add.
Yeah. I think that's part of it for sure.
Yeah.
And it was wild for this being like, okay, these machines are like, in the world of machining, these machines are nearly identical to each other, the one we sold and the ones that we have now. And like the subtleties are like, the differences are very subtle.
It's almost more difficult, I feel like.
Yeah. But it just kind of drives it home, like, A, how valuable standardization is.
Yeah. Because
if things were truly standardized, this wouldn't be an issue. And B, how small of differences can really change things, and just soak up a ton of time and labor.
Yeah.
Or introduce defects, etc. Like, it's just incredible.
Yeah, no, for sure. So here's the question. I'll just read it. Okay, I'm curious what you guys have to say on this topic in general. Parentheses, and you've touched on it before. I brought up the idea of Kamishibai board for daily/weekly tasks, and my colleague asked how that is different than setting up email reminders. My response was, anyone can see it without needing the computer, and it takes 1 second to grasp the status of things. What's your take on using a physical system versus computers? I feel like that's sort of two questions. One is Kamishibai board versus email reminders. The other is just generally computer versus non, which is definitely.
I think they're related.
For sure.
My first thought, like just on the topic of what we were talking about before, in regards to load leveling in a workforce, is an email reminder doesn't come until some command and control type of thing has said, now is the time to do it.
That's a great point.
Whereas a Kamishibai board is there anytime somebody has a Slack moment. And spoiler alert, we started a Kamishibai board. But I think that is super key, especially for getting the running out of the company away from like one person or one system sort of overarching vision. Putting the power into people's hands to say, I have a moment, I'm going to go do something that needs to happen in this organization. And here is this convenient list that shows me everything that will need to be done this week and everything that has been done this week. So that's the first thing that jumps to mind for me.
Yeah, definitely that. I mean, I think there's a lot of little things like email reminders. If no one, like one of my struggles with calendars in general, and email reminders are not exactly the same problem. Well, no, I guess you can fix it. I was going to say, like, once an event passes, it's no longer like if you have inbox 0, then the email reminders will persist until someone handles them.
Sure.
But like you're saying, if you're triggering it weekly, and then I don't know, there's just a lot of issues. Like one really nice thing about a Kamishibai board is like you can take a Sharpie and write an extra note on the card. And then once it's nearly illegible with all the notes and information that's useful to that task, you can go update it in a computer or something like that. Like that physical, those physical cards are not to be underestimated, I think.
Yeah.
And you saw this with your production board, right? Of like employees suddenly making changes in a way that maybe they wouldn't on an email. Yeah, I guess like I'm trying. What are the advantages of an email reminder? I guess that you don't have to be in the shop to do it, right? And
yeah, if you're working across different locations, that's pretty key.
It still feels like Trello would be a better bet, right? And,
sure.
And then the other is that, like he touched on this, it's just like at a glance, you know the status, which is big. Like opening an inbox and seeing all the things, it's not, you're going to have to read all of them. Yeah. You're not like, okay.
And you have to sort and prioritize.
Yeah.
Whereas theoretically, at least it's not very granular, but there is sorting and prioritization done on a Kamishibai board where you're like, okay, this stuff Yeah, I have this one, notification, quote unquote, not an email notification, but there's a thing on the board that needs to be done this week. There's also 3 things on the board that need to be done today. If all 4 of those things came in an email inbox, you personally have to go through and sort and prioritize what's going to happen first.
Right. And then you could refine that by going like every email reminder that's a weekly task would just say weekly.
Sure.
At the beginning. But yeah, you're still reading that and trying to
load. Yeah.
Load all them into your head, then sort them, then pick one or something.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a lot of the one disadvantage of physical just tends to be location, like needing to be physically present, obviously.
Yeah.
But no system is ideal. And all of the non-physical systems have other big downsides that people tend to just gloss over. So.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I find myself with Kamishibai board and production leveling, imagining it being extremely monotonous. This is sort of a separate topic. Uh-huh. Like every day you go to work and you do exactly this set of things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because I know when we get there, it's going to be like a whole new world of exciting refinements, right? And innovation. But there's definitely part of me that resists the like super standardized every single day. There's no fires. Like, it's funny. The people who start businesses probably love firefighting, right? Probably love, I don't know, some degree of chaos there, which I guess is also why a lot of them tend to not be great operators.
You mean like operators of whatever the operations within
operations,
a business?
Yeah. It's like good operations are monotonous, are boring, right? It's not thrilling. Ideally, thrilling is bad.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting as we are moving towards having our work order slips function more like Kanban / travelers and move with physical goods in the system. I am realizing that we're going to have to create some sort of other way to visualize the system as a whole.
Yeah.
As a group, mostly as a group, and that might just be a screen where we can kind of pull up everything we have in some different views. Mm-hmm. Or I guess maybe this is I might be looking at this wrong.
Okay.
Which might be that we need to drive away from needing to look at the system as a whole together, because really, if the system is properly functioning, you come in the morning and you go and you see the part of the systems that are your responsibilities, and status should be evident and surfaced automatically. Mm-hmm. And so doing a bunch of like group talk about what needs to be done, what are the priorities, is really just a failing of the system. So probably I shouldn't make that view.
I totally get that. Yeah, I guess like to argue it both ways, I think one of the successes seemingly from a distance of your job board is that it's enabled you to iterate quickly and learn a lot about the functioning of the business as a whole, mm-hmm. and like thinking about it more systematically and in a big picture kind of way, because mm-hmm. you got all the information in one place. I remember the conversation early on of sort of being like, well, if you pull it all into one place, isn't that bad? Because like you really like Kanban should travel with the item.
Sure. And
I think like you kind of knew that it might go back to that. But it was a really useful exercise. And so I think, I don't know, I totally understand the desire to have a overarching view of the operation and of its state. Mm-hmm. I think you're right that is not the thing to strive for exactly.
Yeah.
And it may also be the case that if you succeeded in making visual production everywhere, that temptation would start to fade.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the whole beginning of the day of going like, what's important? What do we need to achieve today? Like that is all
right.
Essentially expediting, right? It's like,
yeah, it's all due to a lack of information where it needs to be.
Yeah. And sort of like you were talking about Kanban eliminating urgency. It is the lack of that requires the surfacing of what is more urgent than something else, which, to be clear, we have that every single day in a ton of ways in my shop, which is like, okay, I just finished this task. What exactly should I go do next?
Right.
And that is all done by, I don't know what to call it.
Rubricing.
Well, it's sort of, everyone has, I think, a gut feel.
Yeah.
And I think it's occupying a lot more of our brain than we think. Mm-hmm. And I would love to eliminate it. And some of the not Kamishibai board, the Heijunka board stuff started to speak to that, where you start lining out exactly all the stuff that needs to happen hour by hour.
Yeah.
It feels kind of daunting, I have to say.
Oh, yes.
But I guess on the flip side, you sort of want the failure, because then it tells you you're doing it wrong, right? And it finally being specified, you can modify it, right? Like, yeah, if you systemize it and then it fails, you can adjust the system, instead of right now where we're just ad hoc every day and patting ourselves on the back for a job well done.
Good hustle. Such good hustle.
Yeah, like, wow, the team really pulled it out today. Yeah, and then you add another person, and there's this whole onboarding process of them understanding the different aspects and weights, and UPS picks up at this time, so really we need to pack that thing up. Oh, but to pack that I need to go do this other thing.
Yeah.
And I'll screw myself if I don't start the CNC now. So and then we pick one.
That's probably a good place to wrap up for today, huh?
Yeah.
Another juicy episode.
Yeah. Oh, last thought on Kamishibai boards as it relates to production leveling.
Yeah.
I think those two are one and the same, essentially, because there is a need to do tasks daily that are easy to lump, right? That are easy to batch. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that doing processes on an ongoing basis is better than doing them all at once. I think a lot of small businesses end up putting off tasks. I know I do. And then it's like, oh man, I need to input all these wholesale orders into the system. While I'm doing that, let me do 5 of them, instead of like a daily task being like, are they all in the system? Yeah. And suddenly that smooths out how those orders hit the shop floor, and just have huge upside of doing stuff spread over time. And the Kamishibai board is a good way of doing that. Yeah, totally. It seems like in general, maybe the breakdown between a Heijunka board and a Kamishibai board is people use a Heijunka board for sort of their value add and like actual production, and Kamishibai is for auxiliary processes. I think that's right, based on very little information. I was actually just thinking today that I would really love to go to the gutter company. I would really love to go to that food company. Yeah. Because I would love to see it implemented. Like, a lot of the concept you read in a book, like maybe part of the filter for what people focus on is what is easy to imagine when you read it in a book, versus the things that are really hard to imagine. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, thanks all so much for listening. Always great hearing from you guys. The podcast is on Instagram at IncrementalCI. Check it out. Send us a message. Follow us. Share it with your friends. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram, and austeremfg.com on the internet, and arta.cards on the internet and on Instagram. And you can find me at lichen_mfg on Instagram, lichenprecision.com on the internet, and there's a Patreon. Go check it out. We'll talk to you soon.